Spencer Kuiper, it is your turn. Spencer is a graduate student at UBC as well. He is going to talk about mapping stream attributes important to fish in coastal BC with Airborne LiDAR. Would you mind changing on your screen share? Perfect. It's kind of glitchy.
Is that flashing? Yeah, it's flashing. Hey, let's. How does that look? Better? No. How's that?
Yeah, looks better on my side. So yeah, take it away there. Thanks.
Good. Okay. Hello, my name's Spencer. I'm a master's student at the Integrated Remote Sensing Studio at UBC. Today I'm going to talk about mapping stream attributes important to fish in coastal British Columbia with Airborne LiDAR. This research is quite collaborative in nature, so I'd just like to shout out to the co-authors and other researchers with the Canadian Forest Service, BCTS, and the Pacific Salmon Ecology and Conservation Lab, also at UBC. So a brief overview. I'm going to go into some background about fish habitat and using LiDAR to delineate streams, talk a bit about my study area, the data that we used for this study, go into my methods, some results, and then look at what's next for this research. So a variety of stream structural attributes are important for salmonids or salmonidae, so trout, salmon, and those type of species. Flow rate, channel depth, habitat unit or morphological unit classification, instream large wood, channel width, channel gradient, sediment size, and water temperature are all important. The little graph on the right, you can see that for the pool habitat types, the salmonid density is much higher than for the other habitat types, and similar relationships are found across a variety of these structural attributes. So field surveys of stream structure and salmonid habitat are costly, time-consuming, and can be dangerous to undertake in larger streams in more remote areas. So remote sensing has been used to complement these field surveys for a long time now, and the proven ability of LiDAR to generate detailed terrain models that allow for an in-depth characterization of small-scale terrain is becoming increasingly valuable. So from a LiDAR-derived DEM, it's quite easy to derive stream location and flow direction using open source GIS tools. From this, we can then get basic attributes like stream order, where we can look at how branches of different streams connect to one another as they move throughout a watershed. Once we overlay this with a LiDAR-derived digital elevation model, we can then see how the profile of the stream changes over time. And in British Columbia specifically, it's important to note that if the gradient is greater than 20% over 100 meters, then we deem that stream not accessible for fish. So you can see in the little graph here, the red is where that slope gets quite large over a specific distance. So then we can see there's a variety of attributes we can pull using only LiDAR data. We can overlay stand height, canopy cover, we can get the stream class, we can look at potential accessibility for fish, and stream gradient throughout a watershed. So this was all research done in 2017 by Piotr Tompolsky and another member of the Integrated Remote Sensing Studio. So our approach is to then derive key stream habitat components individually from LiDAR data and build a model to predict these small scale habitat classes. So moving from the broad watershed level to small scale stream reaches. So we looked at two watersheds on Vancouver Island, the Artlish watershed, kind of north central Vancouver Island, in between Port Alice and Campbell River, and the Namint watershed, which is south central Vancouver Island, right near Port Alberni. This is a close-up map of the Namint watershed where the rest of this research is focused. So we collected data at 8 streams throughout the watershed using the fish habitat assessment procedure. It is used to assess physical stream characteristics, where we divided the stream into its morphological units of riffles, pools, cascades, and glides. These units are formed by differences in flow rate, depth, water turbidity, and channel bed substrate size. We then, after splitting it into its individual habitat units, we measured the length of these units, the Bankful width, Bankful depth, wetted depth, the gradient of the water's surface, and then we did a count of in-stream large wood within each habitat type. So to look at our 8 streams, they ranged from class S2, so fish bearing with a Bankful width greater than 5 meters, all the way down to S6, so non-fish bearing with a Bankful width less than 3 meters, so quite small headwater streams is what we were looking at. We tried to measure at least roughly 200 meters of each stream reach with a variety of different in-stream wood sizes and amounts recorded. So moving on from the field data, our LiDAR data was acquired in 2015 using a Regal Q1560 dual channel sensor. It had a point density of 25 to 35 points per meter squared, with a variety of other attributes there. So our general methodological flow, we went from a point cloud, we created a digital elevation model from which we derived our streams, and then once we had the delineated streams, we were able to extract our stream attributes. So the first metric that we extracted from our LiDAR was the terrain metrics. So in the black and white in the top there is just a digital elevation model. From that, we can derive a slope raster to look at the changes in elevation between pixels. And then we can start to get more detailed metrics like roughness or shading, and aspect, other things like that. We then look at the canopy and understory height, where we use P95, so the height threshold in which 95% of points fall under to characterize canopy height, and then P15, the height in which 15% of points fall under to characterize our understory vegetation height. On the right-hand side is Elk Creek. This is the stream that most of the upcoming figures are shown in. So Elk Creek is a small tributary here. A road crosses it right along here with a little bridge. And then this is the main stem of the Namit River flowing through here. So after we extracted our canopy and understory height metrics, our terrain and slope metrics, it was time to delineate streams. So because our streams were so small and in such complex, steep and forested areas, we had to use a bit of a unique approach to delineate these streams. So we took a 1 meter digital elevation model, we resampled it to 10 meters, and we ran a breach depression algorithm to remove sinks and hills and essentially force the water force our flow accumulation and flow direction rasters through. Once we had a 10 meter stream raster, to further enforce these flow patterns, because we found that water would flow and hit a road and then run along the side of the road, or run along the side of a river, or run around a mound. We burned the streams through the roads. So where the 10 meter stream crossed the road, we lowered the elevation, and then we reprocessed our 1 meter DEM into the final DEM and ran just the usual flow accumulation and flow direction. And our results were quite good, with the red line showing the ALS or LiDAR measured stream, and then the blue showing our field measured stream. Our next attribute was Bankful width. So we took a slope raster and we used a cost accumulation, where we looked at the accumulated cost of the slope pixels to the nearest water source pixel, shown in red. And then we expanded our center line to use a threshold. So we expand the center line based on these different accumulation thresholds, so we can grow and shrink our wetted or Bankful width. as you can see in this animation. So it's quite cool. It's quite interesting. Afterwards, we decided on a threshold based on our field data. So our threshold was 18 slope units. We crop it to our known study stream, and then we measure the mean unit width by generating perpendicular transects and counting the number of wet pixels that fall underneath each transect line. We group these into our known habitat units, and we compare them to our field measured width. So in general, we had quite a bit of success measuring width on these small streams. We had a bias of about -1. So generally we underpredicted with a bit of over prediction in Headwater Creek, mainly from the steepness of it and a high canopy cover. This method works better when you have a wider range of widths. So streams that have very narrow sections and very wide sections seem to work better. The next attribute we extracted was in-stream large wood. We actually adapted Lucas's algorithm that he presented on earlier for forest floor coarse wood, but we added an intensity threshold. So we followed his steps of cropping the point cloud to our stream. We looked at all ALS returns under 2 meters instead of 1 meter. We kept only the top 30% of intensity returns to differentiate returns that hit wood versus returns that hit water. We identify the linear features, and then we use the vectorization algorithm where we convert the linear points to vector. We buffer the points, we find the center line of these points, and then clip the center lines to our stream width and remove all lines that are less than 1 meter long. So we had, again, quite good results. We were able to accurately detect about 80% of this wood. For some streams were greatly underpredicted, like Gray Creek, which had, I think, 95% canopy cover, and Headwater Creek that just had a large amount of in-stream wood. So after extracting all of these different attributes, we use them as predictor variables in a random forest machine learning classification algorithm to predict our riffles, pools, glides, and cascades. We also used an intensity class. So we took the intensity value of ground points, or of ground points, and we classified them into very low, low, medium, high, very high, to use as sort of a proxy for stream depth, because of the nature of our ALS being near infrared. It couldn't penetrate the entire water column, but our streams in some areas were quite shallow. So we did get some returns that we think went through the water. So this is what all of those layers looked like in one stream. We have normalized elevation, a topographic roughness index, intensity classification, our canopy height, our understory cover, and an in-stream wood count. So overall, we had 85% accuracy in delineating our morphological units. Riffles and glides were most often confused, and pools had the best individual unit accuracy. There was mistakes sort of as we move and flow down a river, where smaller kind of riffles that lead into a pool would just be totally encompassed by the pool. You can sort of see that at the top of Headwater Creek here. But in general, we had quite a bit of success modeling these units. We found that roughness and normalized elevation, so our topographic variables, were the most important, followed by canopy height, the intensity class, understory cover, bankful width, and then lastly, in-stream wood. But they were all very important and decreased our accuracy quite a bit if we removed any of them from our model. So while out in the field, we also flew UAV and walked our streams with mobile laser scanning. So we used a GeoSlam Zeb Horizon. So this is an ortho photo that we created from our drone. You can see the stream sort of at the top corner here, and then in black is the general location of our GeoSlam transect. There's a bridge right in the middle here, and that's important to note just for the next slides to kind of get the bearings. So on the right is the full GeoSlam point cloud. You can see the bridge at the top. It's about 15 meters wide. The geoslime doesn't work great to actually get the tops of all of these trees, but when you crop it to just the understory vegetation, you can start to see the river channel at the bottom there shown in blue and the banks quite clearly. And then once you crop it to ground level, you can see in white sort of the path that we walked up and down the stream and where we had to walk around fallen logs and such. So once we take that ground level cloud, we can zoom in on to it. So we see a big piece of in-stream large wood. This tree was actually taller than I am, so it's about 2 meters tall. You can see very fine detail of the smaller logs crossing into the stream, and you can even start to see some of the individual river cobbles there. So it's quite dense data at about 8,000 points per meter. So it'll be interesting to see what type of information we can pull from that. So our outcomes, the habitat type was about 80 to 86% accuracy. Our large wood was 80% accuracy, and our stream width correlated well to our field measured stream width with an R of 0.8. Topography was, as we predicted, our most important predictor. Sort of the limitations are the ability to predict stream attributes is very dependent on our overstory cover. If you have a high percentage of canopy cover, the LiDAR just isn't going to make it all the way to the forest floor, and you're not going to be able to get these topographic variables. Narrow and steep streams were quite problematic. So if they're less than 1 meter wide, we use 1 meter pixels. So that was problematic and created a lot of error. We'd like to see how this moves to additional stream networks, watersheds, and bigger streams. And then additional work using UAV LiDAR, mobile LiDAR, and then a full characterization of kind of the bankside vegetation, as well as comparing this to fish data that we collected. So thank you. That's my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you, Spencer. That was really interesting. Let's wait for a few questions to come in, trickle in. 800 points per meter, eh?
Wow. 8,000 points per meter for that.
8,000, sorry.
Yeah. So it's quite dense. It's funny, the stream little point cloud there of about 200 meters is about 5 to 10 gigabytes large. So it's
yeah, you need some good servers for that one.
Yeah.
Wow. Roger Wheat, really impressive application of LiDAR for mapping fish habitats. Yes, I agree. Fiona of ABMI, were you using Whitebox GAT or what open source software you mentioned?
Yes, so most of this was done in R. We processed all the LiDAR in the LiDAR package, and then we did use, there's a Whitebox, I guess, is ported to R. So I used the Whitebox R package to create some of the topographic variables, and then all of the sort of DEM pre-processing was in there too.